So, Prince William steps out of a briefing at Clarence House, and his expression essentially reveals the entire story before a single word is spoken. That is precisely how you know this is far from another mundane meeting about logistics or upcoming public duties. For months, the palace has meticulously projected a very deliberate image of King Charles facing his medical battle with unwavering fortitude and poise. To be perfectly fair, that narrative was proving effective. Public appearances persisted, official statements remained controlled, and the entire apparatus functioned as if everything were completely normal. But then, this sudden gathering takes place, convened with what palace insiders describe as unprecedented urgency, and all at once, that carefully constructed facade begins to show major cracks. What really catches my attention is the specific roster of who was allegedly inside that room. We are not talking about standard press secretaries or digital media managers here. Insiders indicate that senior royal strategists were present, medical experts were present, and Prince William himself was in attendance. When he finally exited that session, numerous royal commentators immediately observed that a distinct change had occurred in his overall demeanor. He bore the unmistakable look of a man carrying a heavy burden that wasn't there previously. I believe that particular detail is what truly matters most in this situation, because William has spent decades mastering a perfectly stoic public persona. He is incredibly skilled at it. So when individuals who study his movements daily state that he looked visibly altered, it is absolutely something we need to pay close attention to. Before we dive deeply into what all of this signifies, a quick reminder, if you are new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss critical updates on this situation as it unfolds. All right, let's analyze what actually separated this specific briefing from the countless other meetings occurring across royal offices every single day. The absolute secrecy surrounding the event is undeniably the primary red flag. According to emerging reports, aides were strictly instructed to keep all operational details entirely locked down. Pressed questions went completely unanswered, discussions were abruptly cut short, and even veteran palace staff members who have served for decades were left completely in the dark. That is simply not standard procedure. The palace is fundamentally an organization built upon meticulous communication and highly organized schedules. Under normal circumstances, every staff member understands their exact role, and information moves predictably through established channels. Consequently, when that entire machine suddenly goes dead silent, when individuals who are traditionally fully briefed receive absolutely nothing, it strongly implies that the subject matter was so incredibly sensitive that they simply could not risk any leaks occurring before final determinations were reached. Now look, I completely understand that personal privacy is paramount, particularly when it comes to serious health challenges. Nobody is arguing that the royal family owes the public every single microscopic medical detail. However, there is a massive distinction between safeguarding personal privacy and generating an environment where even internal staff can sense that something incredibly grave is transpiring. That exact discrepancy is precisely where public speculation ignited. Once that kind of momentum begins, it rapidly takes on a life of its own. You cannot control it, and you certainly cannot walk it back. The palace understands this reality better than anyone. They have successfully navigated public perception through generations of intense crises, major scandals, and eras of profound national instability. They thoroughly comprehend the natural rhythm of how information circulates, how prolonged silence is interpreted, and how media vacuums inevitably get filled by whoever raises their voice the loudest. Therefore, when they deliberately select silence regardless, when they consciously accept the massive risk of runaway rumors instead of getting out ahead of the narrative with even a basic, carefully phrased press release, that executive decision itself becomes a massive component of the story. It explicitly reveals that the internal calculus has fundamentally shifted. The traditional playbook has been discarded. Whatever was being debated behind those closed doors was easily significant enough that standard rules of public engagement were no longer deemed sufficient or appropriate. What's truly fascinating is just how rapidly public focus pivoted from the actual meeting itself to what the situation implies for Prince William specifically. He has been gradually assuming far more prominent public-facing responsibilities for several months now. That part isn't entirely new. Anyone tracking royal news has clearly seen him stepping forward. However, palace insiders are currently whispering that this particular phase represents a fundamental transformation. He is now being actively integrated into high-level discussions that previously belonged strictly to the reigning monarch and his most trusted inner circle. This isn't merely ceremonial duties, ribbon-cutting events, or routine charity galas. These are genuine, highly strategic debates regarding the long-term survival of the monarchy itself. Sessions that were once reserved for distant, future planning now unexpectedly demand his immediate personal oversight. Executive choices that were once categorized as far-off considerations are suddenly requiring urgent day-to-day management. That represents a remarkably drastic shift in velocity, and it certainly did not occur slowly over an extended period. It accelerated exponentially as a direct result of this current health crisis. This rapid acceleration is highly critical because it fundamentally alters the entire architecture of the royal transition itself. Historically, the transfer of sovereign responsibilities from a monarch to an heir takes place almost imperceptibly. It's an incredibly gradual evolution, measured across decades rather than compressed months. The heir slowly accumulates more patronages, undertakes more state functions, and occupies a more visible space on the world stage. Yet, the true power, the core constitutional authority, and the definitive final word on matters of institutional direction remains exclusively with the reigning sovereign until the very end. That is the historical precedent. That is the established model. But what happens when that traditional timeline is drastically compressed? What happens when a slow generational transition transforms overnight into emergency preparation? That is the precise question that nobody within the palace walls is willing to answer in public. But it is the exact dilemma that the Clarence House meeting forced into the light. William is no longer merely preparing to inherit the crown at some vague point in the future. He is actively training to assume monumental weights that might land on his shoulders much sooner than anyone ever anticipated. This preparation isn't a distant academic exercise. It is occurring right now, in real time, with immediate and profound implications for how the entire British monarchy functions on a daily basis. The deep emotional reality of this scenario is incredibly intricate as well, and it's something that deserves real reflection. On one hand, you have a devoted son watching his father navigate a deeply personal, grueling medical battle. That is an incredibly heavy burden for any human being to endure. On the other hand, you have the future sovereign who recognizes that the institutional stability of the crown cannot be left up to chance or uncertainty. Those two contrasting worlds do not always align cleanly or easily. Sources close to the family indicate that William fully comprehends the monumental gravity of this historical crossroads, even as his primary personal focus remains steadfastly on supporting his father's recovery. That intense dual pressure, juggling the role of a deeply worried son with that of the direct heir who must prepare for every conceivable outcome, is reportedly what characterizes every single conversation taking place behind closed doors. We also tend to forget that William has navigated this level of intense public trial before. He watched his mother contend with unimaginable global pressure, and he endured profound personal grief at a tender age under the harshest media spotlight imaginable. He understands far better than most what it requires to process internal heartbreak while the entire world watches your every move. That formative experience profoundly molded his character. It made him fiercely protective of his immediate family, deeply skeptical of media intrusion, and absolutely unyielding in his desire to insulate his own children from the harshest realities of public life. But right now, he is confronting an entirely different category of adversity. This is not a sudden, unexpected shock. It's a prolonged, exhausting era of ambiguity. It's the specific kind of trial that slowly erodes your strength over time, forcing you to actively contemplate scenarios you would naturally prefer to avoid entirely. Furthermore, he is enduring this while TV cameras shadow his every step, while media analysts dissect his exact facial expressions, and while the global public endlessly debates his internal state of mind. That is an almost incomprehensible burden to bear. The vast majority of people are permitted to navigate a family health emergency in complete privacy, given the necessary space to feel whatever emotions arise without it transforming into a global news headline. William is simply not afforded that luxury. Every single instance of outward composure is a monumental feat of willpower. Every public engagement is a calculated exhibition of strength that may not mirror the true emotional reality occurring beneath the surface. Simultaneously, the internal debates regarding King Charles's daily schedule are becoming increasingly urgent. The king has maintained an incredibly demanding pace despite his ongoing medical treatments, an effort that is honestly both deeply impressive and somewhat alarming all at once. Loyal supporters view his persistence as an incredibly inspiring display of lifelong dedication. Meanwhile, certain close advisors, according to palace leaks, view this relentless workload as entirely unsustainable. They are currently debating whether specific official duties must be scaled back or temporarily reassigned to other working royals. This isn't because anyone doubts his profound dedication, but rather because the sheer physical toll of the monarchy is immense, even for an individual in peak physical condition. When you layer a serious health battle on top of intense state papers, major public appearances, and the unending legal obligations tied to being the sovereign, the operational math becomes incredibly complicated very quickly. Crucially, those sovereign obligations are not optional. They are strictly constitutional. The reigning monarch must sign past legislation, must hold regular private audiences with the prime minister, and must execute the core ceremonial duties that keep the actual machinery of government moving forward. You can certainly delegate minor things. You can redistribute charitable patronages, split public appearances among other members of the family, and modify travel schedules to minimize physical exhaustion. But specific core functions can only be legally executed by the monarch themselves. That is the unyielding constitutional reality. Therefore, the overarching dilemma evolves past simple workload management and directly into a question of absolute capacity. Can the king realistically continue to execute these indispensable state duties without severely jeopardizing his own medical recovery? If the definitive answer to that query begins to waver, what exactly is the next step? These are no longer abstract, hypothetical scenarios for the future. They are highly practical, logistical questions being actively debated in concrete terms by the very strategists whose primary job is to ensure the British monarchy survives whatever challenges come its way. This is exactly where the story becomes deeply human. Beyond the grand titles, royal protocols, and emergency contingency blueprints, you have actual people who have worked alongside Charles for multiple decades, navigating this profound cloud of uncertainty right by his side. These are advisors who have dedicated their entire lives to his service, and family members grappling with deep personal anxieties that they can almost never show to the public. Reports describe the internal atmosphere behind palace walls as simultaneously tense and intensely personal, which makes complete sense when you think about it. High-level strategic planning is one thing. Organizing for a future where a leader you deeply care about might be physically incapable of fulfilling the supreme role they waited their entire life to assume is something else entirely. Nobody wants to visualize that scenario, yet the further these internal discussions progress, the more difficult it becomes to ignore the profound question resting beneath the surface of everything. For the palace staff, this situation goes far beyond mere professional duty. These are loyal individuals who have invested entire careers into supporting Charles, who have traveled the globe with him, provided him counsel, and watched him patiently prepare for this ultimate responsibility through decades of waiting. They are deeply invested, not just in the crown as an institution, but in Charles as a human being. Consequently, when they are required to draft plans for outcomes they would honestly prefer not to even think about, it extracts a heavy emotional toll. Insiders hint that several long-serving aides have found the past few weeks to be extraordinarily difficult. They are consummate professionals who will always execute their duties flawlessly, but it is impossible to work intimately with someone for 20 or 30 years without developing a genuine, deep-seated bond. This human element of the narrative ripples far past the immediate royal family. It profoundly impacts every single individual within the inner orbit of the court, from top-tier advisors and household staff to the massive network of charities and organizations that rely heavily on royal endorsement. The uncertainty radiates outward in a manner that is rarely fully visible to the outside world. That underlying question, the one that absolutely nobody wants to articulate out loud, yet everyone knows is dictating current events, is essentially what happens if the king can no longer manage this monumental burden by himself. Charles waited significantly longer than any other heir apparent in modern British history to ascend to this throne. It required decades of intense preparation, decades of constant public judgment, and decades of watching and waiting while the modern world completely transformed all around him. He finally achieves that lifelong destination, finally opens the historic chapter that his entire life prepared him to lead, and almost immediately encounters a massive crisis that has absolutely nothing to do with global politics or grand ceremony. It is simply deeply personal. Current reports indicate that he remains completely, resolutely determined to carry out his sacred oaths, entirely unwilling to permit physical adversity to characterize his legacy, pushing forward with the exact same profound sense of duty that anchored him through all those long years of waiting. That fierce determination has rightfully become a powerful symbol of resilience for millions of his supporters. However, it is also rapidly transforming into a source of deep anxiety among the specific officials tasked with protecting both the health of the king and the safety of the institution he embodies. There is an incredibly thin line between inspiring dedication and dangerous physical overexertion. Discerning exactly where that boundary lies, when you're the sovereign, when every single public outing carries immense symbolic weight, and when canceling a single appearance isn't merely a personal choice but a national event, is remarkably difficult. Charles has reportedly made it abundantly clear that he fully intends to press onward as long as he is physically capable. He views his sovereign role not as a logistical burden to be carefully managed, but as a sacred, lifelong responsibility to be fully executed. That exact philosophy dictates his every choice. It also makes it vastly more challenging for senior advisors to recommend that he scale back his efforts. How do you look a king in the eye, a man who waited his whole life to serve his nation, and tell him that he needs to serve less? How do you properly balance deep respect for his historic determination with genuine, protective concern for his physical well-being? Those are the precise debates occurring at this very moment, and there are absolutely no easy solutions available. That is the exact paradox palace strategists are currently facing. How do you balance unshakable duty with the stark physical realities of a major health battle? Every single engagement holds massive national significance, yet every single appearance demands immense energy and physical stamina. Some firmly believe that Charles's visible presence helps stabilize and comfort the nation. Others quietly worry that the actual burden is vastly heavier than anyone is willing to publicly admit. This is not an argument fueled by political maneuvers or court protocol. It is driven by authentic, deeply felt concern for a human being. While all of these intense dynamics play out behind closed doors, the level of public and media scrutiny has scaled up to an intensity we haven't witnessed in the modern era. Every single public outing is microscopically analyzed. Every single press release is thoroughly dissected, and royal journalists constantly hunt for hidden meanings in the smallest conceivable details. A minor alteration in a daily routine instantly translates to a global breaking news headline. A single carefully selected phrase triggers days of nonstop media debate. The sheer scale of the pressure resting on the family to present an image of total normalcy while steering through profound private anxiety must be completely astronomical. That immense pressure creates its own distinct set of institutional complications. When every single public second is under a microscope, there is absolutely zero margin for an off day. There is no permissible space for looking exhausted, distracted, or visibly worried. The public performance of total institutional stability must be completely flawless. Even when stability is the absolute last thing anyone is actually feeling internally, maintaining that facade is exhausting under standard conditions. Under these current circumstances, it is something entirely unprecedented. The royal family aren't merely managing a serious health emergency, they are actively managing the global perception of that emergency while simultaneously experiencing it in real time behind closed doors. That dual existence, navigating the raw, private reality while executing a perfect public performance, demands an almost superhuman capacity for emotional control. Furthermore, they are forced to do this without the single most vital tool that ordinary families depend on during times of crisis: absolute privacy. Shifting our focus to the broader family dynamics, internal reports indicate that relatives have been actively rallying around Charles in ways that remain completely hidden from the public eye. William's rapidly expanding institutional footprint isn't solely about training for his future responsibilities as monarch.